Welcome to the Past Present Feature Podcast.
Directors Brian Cassidy and MELANIE SHATZKY delve into the making of their Rotterdam documentary, A Man Imagined, which focuses on the life of Lloyd, a homeless man with schizophrenia surviving amidst urban detritus and decay. They discuss their unique approach to storytelling, challenges in finding and capturing Lloyd's essence, and their collaborative relationship with him throughout the filming process, emphasizing the importance of portraying homelessness with dignity and complexity, rather than falling into common tropes. They also speak on the art of portraiture and the complexities of navigating trauma and memory and their narrative. The film reveals the existential solitude of a man at once gentle and marred by a storied past. Then I found an article about 9 months ago from the Globe. You guys were hoping to make a film about homelessness and basically volunteered at a shelter in Montreal for months before you ran into Lloyd, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and one thing is we always knew we wanted to make something, around people surviving on the street. We were aware that, homelessness comes with a lot of well-worn images and tropes. And there are a lot of very good and interesting films made with the homeless population. We wanted to do something quite different in our approach. So we spent a year volunteering at a homeless shelter, giving out coffees and hanging out and having meals with, some of these guys as they would come through. And while we met some very interesting people, it wasn't until the year mark that we met Lloyd. And it was at that point that we knew we had to make a film with him at the center and only him. Initially, we thought maybe we would weave together, maybe make a multi-character piece. But then MELANIE and I were so taken by Lloyd's presence. Lloyd has this incredible physical presence. He almost has this like stone-carved face and these piercing blue eyes. He's almost Lincoln-esque. It's a kind of face that you don't see very much these days. It's like he stepped out of another
Absolutely.
century.
Yeah.
And against that beautiful and hard face came this almost soothing baritone voice, this gentle, almost ASMR-like quality of a voice. And these paradoxes made him, at least for us, a kind of transcendent person, someone who was more than whatever story in a reportage way they might tell, but he just had an aura about him. And MELANIE and I both come from a background as artists and as still photographers. That's our origin. And so we were both immediately struck by this and said, no, we have to make a film with him. And importantly, he approached us. He saw us on the grounds of the shelter, speaking with people and making some test scenes with our camera. And he showed great interest in the camera and in being in front of it. So from the very beginning, it was like this very mutual interest.
I have a few thoughts. First of all, why? What drew you to the topic of homelessness? What made you feel like you needed to capture a story within that world, that space?
Well, both Brian and I have always had a soft spot for people living on the margins. For example, Brian used to work with people experiencing mental distress. And I, as a teenager, spent a lot of time with street kids and people living on the streets, and would even invite them over to my parents' house to make them dinner and allow them to shower, and spent a lot of time. And I knew for myself, that eventually I would want to go back and make a film with people experiencing homelessness. And so that's when we approached the National Film Board.
Yeah. And also, I think the idea of urban outskirts, and these areas, these kind of non-places where we grew up around these areas. And we also made a film called Interchange, which really looks at these places that are almost just forgotten, and you can't really imagine anything coming out of them. And they seem so sort of forbidding and dehumanized. And we really thought that those landscapes were fascinating and fertile terrain to situate and observe a human existence and someone who subsists and thrives off of those very environments that we had sort of seen as so forbidding. So the film is situated often, the scenes take place in some of these most sort of harsh and unforgiving perimeters of the city. And so that juxtaposition of such a gentle and yet resilient man experiencing his own sort of solitude and survival in these particular urban landscapes was fascinating to us.
How do you know when you found your protagonist in the documentary? Like, how do you also know when it's not just on an ensemble, but one person? Like, how do you know when you found your protagonist?
It just feels right. I don't know. It's just an intuitive thing. I think Brian was explaining how we were so taken with Lloyd and just his aura and his presence. And he was immediately so interested in what we were doing. And then we started filming with him, and he was so interested in the whole process. And it became clear to us that he was an artist as well. And he loved creating, and he was so easy to create with. And together, we co-created this portrait. You know, he took an active role in his own portrayal, which I think is pretty unique because not everyone has that sort of strength to do that or interest. And he really took an interest, and basically he's portraying a version of himself. But we would work together to decide what the scenes would be, all based on his life, all based on things that he would normally do, but we would want to cast them in the most sort of cinematic way possible. But yeah, it really became a relationship. And this is someone that we developed a lot of love for. And my assumption is he developed love for us as well. So it was really based on that sort of mutual trust and interest that propelled us to make this portrait solely about him.
And also, yeah. And, you know, whereas in a more traditional documentary, you'd be looking perhaps for the story. What's your story?
Sure.
Where you come from? And for us, it was much more about his presence. We were looking for somebody with such a striking presence, and that comes out, and that's evident in the film in so many ways. He's a person of paradox. He's living this very kind of harsh and chaotic existence, and yet he has a real gracefulness, almost the gracefulness of a dance.
When you asked him, you guys were talking about his life and it being hard. He said, "No, my life's not that hard." It was like, wow, the perspective that he has, like, it's crazy. That was crazy.
Yeah, and that's something that we kind of wanted to highlight in a way in the film, that it's not a sad sack sort of a film. And he's not someone that feels sorry for himself. Yeah, he might have some regrets here or there and some sadness. But at the end of the day, he's actually someone who's really proud of his ability to live on the streets and to just navigate that difficult terrain. So he never speaks of his life as being without. You know, he never uses the word homeless. He never uses the word unhoused. He says, I live on the streets. It's something that's very active and something that he's proud of. And so this sort of set him apart in a way from some other people. Like for him, the streets are his home.
And so, yeah, it's got the, so certainly the film has an intensity, a raw, intense quality to it, but that's quite different than a pity party or some, he doesn't pity himself, and we don't, as filmmakers, we don't pity him. The idea of, is there hope for this man? Well, that question doesn't really come up because he's surviving. It doesn't mean it's always beautiful or easy by any stretch.
So you're not going for, like, what do they call it? Misery porn or something?
Yeah.
So, question: when did you bring on the National Film Board of Canada? When did you bring them in? What did that process look like? Did you figure out your protagonist? Did you figure out it was Lloyd, and then you went to them, or how did that work?
Well, there was a producer that we had been in touch with for a couple of years, just sort of loosely. And then we approached this person with the idea of, with this particular project. At this point, it was only an idea. Okay. And we hadn't yet approached the shelter We hadn't yet found a protagonist. And the process that they use with projects is if they sort of like the idea, then they say, well, you'll go through a phase called an investigate, which is put together a 5-minute demo. First I think it's put together a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And
the pitch deck kind of thing.
Yeah,
exactly. Then you do like a 5-10 minute demo. And then based on the demo, then they decide whether they're going to greenlight your project.
Got you. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Just the process of, in my mind, it's sizzle. I'm in Hollywood. Sizzle. Let me see a sizzle. Here's your sizzle, But I mean, man, it's like not only obviously the value of having one to show people to help encapsulate, what you're doing and what story you're telling, but also talk about how much it helps you, the filmmaker, to understand what story you're trying to tell when you do a sizzle.
I would say, early on, part of the idea of having multiple characters throughout the piece was, to mitigate risk. The risk that somebody drops out. I mean, it's dealing with people on the street. They live with a lot of inconsistency. You don't know if you're going to, from one day to the next, if someone's going to be around. And so, it made good sense for us to think of it in terms of that this film will have multiple characters if somebody drops out or if somebody...
Yeah. Especially in the world you're in. Yeah. I mean, because I would be naturally concerned with that as well. I mean, it just reminds me of this documentary I've been working on for 3 years. It's called LAPI. Right now it's called LAPI. It's about a private investigator in Los Angeles. And I bring it up because I knew that I wanted to do a documentary about a private investigator. I didn't know what it was going to look like or who it was going to be. So I did it, I look at it as a casting call version of a documentary, which is like, I emailed all 120 PIs in the LA County area.
Wow.
Ended up interviewing 6 of them. I thought it was going to be an ensemble as well. And then this one guy, the first guy, of course, the first guy, right, when was the guy. It's like, oh, I don't need these other people. This is the guy. Plus, like, it's funny how you can go from like thinking you need everything to then realizing, oh, I need to simplify, right? It's this thing where it's like this moment, this light bulb where it's like, oh, this is not that hard. This is not that difficult. Why was I trying to make it so difficult? But at the same time, you want to know like what your options are, I guess, right?
You don't know at the outset what you're going to be taken by, what's going to put. You don't quite know at some point. But yeah, I mean, in our experience, making cinema is largely a process of distillation. It is about refining and figuring out how to say things succinctly and how to go right to the heart of the matter. But at the outset, you don't necessarily know what that's going to be. So, it makes intuitive sense to keep options open and to keep...
You got to go fishing a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We just knew when we met Lloyd. I mean, also, in the way that a painter would be taken with their subject and maybe want to paint them over and over and over again under different lighting conditions and different environments. You just feel that the person in front of your canvas, or in this case, in front of your lens, has something inexhaustible about them that transcends the literal story in their own moment, but something larger, more existential. And that's not easy to find. It has a lot of searching to find that, or at least in our experience.
Yeah,
sure.
And I will add that in Lloyd's case, he really liked being examined closely. So Brian was the one who shot it. And in many instances, Brian is only like 2 or 3 inches from Lloyd's face.
Okay.
And I think for Lloyd, he appreciated being seen. I think for him, it felt like ASMR to be looked at that closely, or even like I would mic him up, or sometimes I would have to put it like directly on his skin, the mic. And he wouldn't flinch at all. And I could just tell that he liked that sort of primary kind of caretaking. Like he's so used to being in institutions and having a more sterile environment that he felt cared for in these moments, so it became a real relationship between us wanting to look at him closely and him wanting to be looked at closely. And that's a rare sort of combination, that you find that kind of match.
So as far as production, we're talking about production already, but like, were there any moments that maybe didn't make the cut or did make the cut where it was like challenging or concerning? Or is there any moments that he had where you're like worried about him? Was he ever kind of expressing any sort of like crazy behavior? Did he ever go Did he go? Did he disappear? Did he always show up? Like what?
Well, that's an interesting question because so we started filming him right before COVID happened. We met him in February of 2020. Okay. So then we had to take a break because everything shut down. And then we found out that we were greenlit by the NFB. Okay. And we couldn't find him for like a month after we were greenlit. No longer.
Y'all were sweating. Y'all were a little worried.
So so remember this idea of having 4 or 5 characters.
Yeah.
It wasn't risky. Well, we were in a very, risky, but exciting, but risky terrain.
So it was, we had met him at a shelter, and right before COVID happened, he went to a halfway house. So we tried to contact him at the halfway house once we found out we were greenlit, and they're like, oh no, he hasn't been here for months. We're like, do you know where he is? Like, could he be back at the shelter? They're like, I don't think he's at the shelter. He's probably in the streets. We went back to the original shelter. They're like, no, he hasn't been here since before COVID.
And, he's truly an off the grid person. Like, he doesn't use email. He doesn't have a phone.
He doesn't have a wallet.
You should have hired my detective, I got him right then. How did you find him?
Well, so we had to go, we went to different shelters trying to locate him. But of course, for confidentiality reasons, they won't give you information.
Oh, right.
The best we could do is leave our phone number there and, then someone can contact you. But then we also walked around the streets of Montreal where people like him hang out and where we knew that he would hang out, and we would walk for hours downtown.
Finding a missing person. We had a picture of him. Have you seen this man? Wow. Waking people up, on the, sleeping in the park guy. And, really just the two of us just really trying to find him.
One interesting story, actually, while we were trying to find him one time, we were downtown in one of these areas that he hangs out, and we noticed there were tents on the street with homeless people in them. And Montreal is not a tent city. So I thought it was a little weird, but I'm like, okay, well, I haven't been here in a while. Maybe, people are allowed to have tents now. And then suddenly the area was looking more and more down and out. And then we realized we were in the middle of an Ari Aster set.
Oh, the one with DiCaprio? No, which one is that?
Always Afraid.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Got you. Yeah.
Yeah. So they happened to be shooting in the city in the exact same area where Lloyd hangs out.
Wow.
And everything, for a couple of blocks, everything just looked, it wasn't during there too. It was
that's wild.
They were all set up. So everything looked a little off, a little bit like a simulacrum of a out area. And she said, this looks strange. And then we later just discovered.
You were inside of a movie. Wow. And all goes back to movies. That's funny.
So we had left our phone number with one of the shelters, and like Melanie said, the shelters can't reveal anything about someone. Mm-hmm. It's up to them to get in touch. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, one day, about 3 weeks or a month in, our phone rings, and it's Lloyd in his beautiful baritone voice. He rarely uses a phone at all, but he called us and said, are we doing it? When are we doing? When do we go? And
then we picked him up the following morning.
And then subsequently it got easier. Because he had called us, and then he had settled into a sort of a halfway house type situation, things stabilized, and we were able to actually call him and set up shoot days and go from there.
And what was amazing too is once he was in that halfway house, he was actually very reliable. So we would only maybe once or twice was he late. But otherwise, we'd say, please be ready for, 10 o'clock. And he'd be ready at 10 o'clock. And we'd go pick him up.
But your rite of passage was that initial kind of scare or whatever. Oh, where did he go? It's always something, it seems like. There's always something. But it always works out when you stick with it. So how many days did you guys shoot?
Well, probably around 45 days or something?
Something like that.
Maybe about 45 days.
Over the spread out of about 2.5 years.
So you see right up top, as the movie starts, you see a shift in seasons from winter to summer and back and forth again. So it was over a longer period of time, but probably about 45, 50 days.
So how do you turn 45 days? What are you shooting? All day long, little pieces of days, a little bit of both, depending on what happens that day?
We're pretty decisive.
maybe 1 to 2 hours per shoot day.
Sure.
Usually.
Okay. Yeah. Which is wonderful, right? You're not overextending yourself, but you're getting some good stuff at the same time. Documentaries are like that. Get little pieces and move on. See you tomorrow.
Documentaries sometimes people can really amass a lot more footage than we did, especially if they're kind of
figuring it out,
chasing the action or observing things in a fly on the wall way. And the idea is just to roll on everything and hope you find it in the edit. That really wasn't the way we worked. We were fairly decisive. Once we figured out what it was we wanted to do with him, I would say we were pretty efficient, and precise about how we were working.
How do you know what you want to do with him? You have a little idea for like a scene or a theme, or you want to touch on something that day? Like, how do you go about okay, this is what I think we want to do today?
I mean, that's a good question. We spent a lot of time just kind of observing him and talking to him and getting to know his rhythms. And then based on that, Brian and I would discuss amongst ourselves, what's the most cinematic way that we can bring this to life, and then bring Lloyd into the conversation. Should this be set in the winter? Should it be set in the summer? And just sort of take it from there. We knew that we wanted some interviews, so we interviewed him in a few different locales, and that was the sort of spine. And then based on, those interviews, I don't know, just...
The shooting and the editing was very much a parallel process all the way through. So that really allows us to be intuitive and to, invariably we would go out and we would shoot something and it would open up other possibilities, and that would, one thing would lead to the next. And putting it together was structurally was almost musical in the sense of, for a good portion of the shooting, it was like creating scenes the way a musician might create songs on an album. You accumulate 8 or 9 songs, and then you say, well, they're going to be 12 on this album, and what's the best sequencing of those? And so it's, you're sort of taking this this approach of, and we very much at first, because I think the kind of movies we like the most are the ones where you really remember the scenes, vivid scenes that stay with you, regardless. And so that we really accommodated an intuitive process where we were creating these sort of vivid scenes. And then later in the process, it was a question of, a kind of narrative discipline and how to bring them together. Where are the redundancies? Where are the holes that we need to fill in? How does that all dovetail with the conversations we have in a more portraiture interview mode? So it all, as it got closer to the final cut, it was a bit more rigorous in that sort of overarching way, act of creation the three of us could do together.
I want to talk about the kind of balance between, I guess, story and tone, where you went for like presence and an aura, right, as a priority over kind of, say, a plot-driven type thing. And so I struggle with this. I mean, I think that's one of the wonderful kind of like spaces to be in and find yourself in. But also, like, you can go down I've gone down personally a road where like plot is priority or like story is priority. I know they're not the exact same thing, and it's not working. And then I'll take a step back and take some breaths, just breathe and just let the film breathe. In these moments where it just hypnotizes you and you just let it be. That's what seems to work a lot of times. So, I mean, I guess in question form, like where does your mind go when you sit down and you say, how much, are we going to focus on these elements? Because you do have to pick your battles sometimes, right? There is kind of like a separation between tone and character driven, character moments and like, letting the space breathe. And then also like, okay, we have to drive the story forward now.
Well, Brian and I both come from a photography background. So it's very much, what's in the frame versus what's out of the frame. Photographs are kind of resolved without too much information.
Sure.
And that has always been sort of our approach to filmmaking, is kind of the visuals and the aura comes first. In this case, we had a little bit of a story from Lloyd. We're not able to get the full story because the full story is not apparent to him. So there's only so much that we could get out of his story. But to us, that's really interesting. And that, that is part of the schizophrenia, that we will never understand what the full story is for him. We do know that his story is real to him. We don't know if it's real to you and me, but it's the best that we can do. And I would say this applies to all our films is portraiture. We make portraiture, but I don't really think that we tell traditional stories.
Right.
So we invite you to inhabit a space along with a character and hopefully, feel some of the feelings that they feel inhabiting those spaces. And hopefully, that you can begin to empathize with him or in any other of our films with people living on the margins.
Because it is about, the goal with filmmaking, I think, good filmmaking, in my opinion, is to feel, right? To feel something more than it is to just take in information. You want to feel it.
Yeah, and I would say also, if I may, we pay a considerable amount of attention to dynamics and contrasts between both the rhythms, the internal rhythms of the scenes, the seasons. So whether it's winter, blistering cold winter, and then it's a jump cut to extremely hot summer, or it's night and then it's day, or the dynamics are really, really intense. There's the sounds of traffic and clamoring cars going by, and it's really, really bringing you up to a place of anxiety and intensity. And then we bring it down to like the gentle sound of crickets or a bee buzzing.
You did that right at the beginning, where he's in nature, and then it just boom, it just cuts to him in traffic with the jarring horns and traffic. Yeah, no, it was juxtaposition is a powerful tool,
especially in the absence of traditional plot and story. And for us, it is important to tell a story and to engage the viewer to become very active participants in the movie. And so what we find to be a great sort of pleasure is to find other means of description to do that. So one of the beautiful things about cinema is that you have all these means of description available to you through sound and through picture and through movement and all these things. And that when you remove the obligation to tell a conventional story in a 3-act structure, which is perfectly fine, and we all love movies like that, and we may very well make one day. But when you sort of remove that, or at least reduce that in the equation, all of these other possibilities within this rich medium of cinema become available to you. And so for us, it's a great pleasure to indulge in that and to find out how to put together a story in those ways.
And I think one of the best to ever do it is David Lynch, right? R.I.P. I mean, as far as just not needing, he had no interest in holding anybody's hand. That's for sure.
Right. Well, and I think there's something about leaving things outside of the margins and raising questions rather than giving answers. But as an artist, you hope you can bring up good questions and engage people to want to sort of fill in those blanks for themselves, and that each person has their own relationship to the movie because you have an answer for them. Yeah,
they're more activated that way on a broader level. Yeah. Any past films, any past documentaries, or anything that inspires you in general, and then also maybe that you looked at when you were making this film? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, for me, my favorite film, I don't know if you've seen it, is called Dog Days by Ulrich Seidl. It's an Austrian filmmaker.
Somebody else talked about this. I have not seen it.
And it's like maybe 4 or 5 different stories about different people experiencing the hottest day of the summer in the Austrian suburbs. And each of these people is very disgruntled, very angry, having to deal with the heat. And it looks at their frustration and the bizarre ways that they cope with their frustration in this crazy heat. The film got very mixed reviews when it came out. A lot of people thought it was like tragedy porn, thought it was that the filmmaker was cruel. And I had a completely different read on the film. I thought the filmmaker was showing people as they are. And it was like, came from a real deep sense of empathy and just funny. Also, it's a deeply, deeply funny movie. And everything's in German, and doesn't matter if you don't know the language. The situations are deeply funny because he gets at something that is so true about how people can just break when everything is going wrong.
It's a part of being a human. Yeah. And I guess maybe audiences didn't want to acknowledge that part. Oh, we're supposed to come to the movies for whatever it is that they expected to come to.
Yeah, but and that film is highly photographic, and a lot of the sort of scenes, but it's certainly shot with a photographer's eye, and coming from the background as a still photographer, it so resonated with me. And it was the first movie that I saw that made me think, well, I can make something too. Like, it felt like it was so outside anything that I had seen before. And it felt so fresh and alive and honest. And I think those are the types of qualities that I at least strive to bring to our filmmaking. And I would think Brian does too.
Yeah. And for me, you know, I take in a lot. I read a lot. I watch a lot of films. So they've all become a kind of part of me, and in ways that there is rarely a direct one-to-one relationship between a certain film and something that we're making. But I would say there was something that was on my mind while making A Man Imagined was this film called Vampire by Carl Theodor Dreyer. It's a Danish filmmaker. The film's from 1932, and was made right at the cusp, at the end of the silent film era, when sound was just beginning.
Oh,
and it's a gothic horror movie that is very poetic and very strange and ethereal and haunting, and it just has a mood about it that is so entrancing, very, very eerie. And Dreyer has a wonderful way of filming the human face, both the topography of the face itself, but also the psychology of a human being as seen through their face. He also did that beautifully in The Passion of Joan of Arc, which was one of the first things I saw that, again, as a photographer, made me interested in making cinema. So, you know, something about that in some kind of indirect way resonated with me as we were filming Lloyd, in navigating some of this, you know, very, very fragile nocturnal terrain, turning corners and shadows. And so there's something there, I think. And then by contrast, the Walt Disney Bambi, something in the way that those films were made, particularly in Bambi, the way nature is, it's very beautiful, the way the natural world is rendered in those films. And, you know, in A Man Imagined, there are these stark contrasts where we go into a kind of hallucinatory mode where Lloyd is immersed in nature and surrounded by the flora and fauna around him, and wanted it to have a kind of hyper real, kind of almost just too saccharine kind of beauty.
Those early Disney films too, man, special. They have power. So the thread about his parents, that was hard. That was tough. He thinks somebody took them into a field, or he's not sure. This is the schizophrenia talking. Like, what is your interpretation of what happened to his parents? This was his big ghost. For me, that was a moment where it was just, fuck, you know, like the trauma, the unresolved. Like it seemed like he just treated that the same way he treats his life, as if not as big of a deal as you or I would, you know. I didn't expect that. Like what happened to his parents that you would determine?
It is as unclear to us as it is to you.
Okay.
He talked about it a lot. For the first year that we filmed with him, he would talk about it every single day. But there was never any sense of resolution about what exactly happened to them and who did what to whom. This is, like I was saying a little while ago, this is something that's true to him.
Sure.
But I don't know if it's true if it would meet the requirements for objective truth.
An investigation or something like this, yeah.
Yeah. So it's something that he lives with.
Mm-hmm.
What I can say is there is some trauma there. What actually happened is unclear.
And it is, yeah, and it's irrelevant, I guess, what actually happened, right? It is about the character's truth.
Yeah.
I mean, we were certainly taken aback, and when he started talking about his parents and a murder that a friend had wrapped his parents up and buried them, and I mean, this was striking. I mean, we couldn't believe, what we were hearing. To a large extent, while we were editing, we were sort of using the ambiguities around that and the impossibility of knowing and plumbing the depth of it. We were kind of using that structurally throughout the film, but also, to tell the story. But, and I think in a way, that's part of where the title "A Man Imagined" comes from, which is intended to be a kind of double entendre, in that it's an acknowledgement that on both sides of the camera, there's an amount that we can't, there's something unknowable, and that perhaps, Melanie and I as filmmakers are imagining him to a certain degree as we construct this portrait, and that he also has this deep, vast, imaginative life. So we really don't know. We're not holding any cards that we don't reveal to the viewer.
Gotcha.
It's intense.
Well, I have a question for you. Rounding the corner on this interview, has he seen the film?
Yes, he has seen it. He's seen it a couple of times.
So he was at the premiere at Rotterdam. Did you guys premiere at Rotterdam? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, we premiered at Rotterdam.
So 2 questions. Was he there? I'm sure he was, right? And then 2, how was Rotterdam?
No, he actually wasn't there. He watched the film in private. We showed him the film in private because he's a very private person, as you probably can tell from the film. He's not someone that likes crowds.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it was a real pleasure to watch the film alongside him. He loved it, and he particularly loved the close-ups of his own eyes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think he's been told probably throughout his life that he has beautiful eyes, and he knows it.
He does. He sure does. He sure does.
Rotterdam was great. We've shown a number of our films there in the past. They've been very supportive of us and our work. It's a great festival. It's a festival that historically has really championed projects that are really trying to push against the boundaries of familiarity and to get into new terrain and to really and so it's a very boundary pushing and exciting festival, and the curation has always been that way, and as a result they've kind of always embraced our work, or often embraced our work. So the premiere was great.
So you premiered there you screened there more than any other festival. Like that seems to be, they've been responsive to your work.
We've shown 4 films there. I would say, more than any other festival.
It seems like, there's festivals that you just vibe with more than others or whatever. Like Santa Barbara Film Festival, I've had a few films there, and it's like, like they've just been, there's some sort of thing there, you know what I mean? Or I think about like Cassavetes with New York Film Festival or Scorsese, whatever. I feel like there's always kind of this home-based festival sometimes.
Depends on the timing, but yeah, for sure. I mean, we've shown Berlin has also been very, very kind to our films, and we've shown in various other festivals. But so it sort of depends on the timing of the film. But yeah, I definitely, there are people that are kind of in your corner, and
and they really embrace more artful forms of storytelling.
Yeah. I so love those European film festivals. And I've been to Berlin once, Berlinale, and man, it was so great. So great. Just the culture around it. And it was just so, I needed it. Because being in LA, it's business. And people were just clamoring to, it's a bit more of a look at me, place. Less about the art, more about the commerce. So yeah, I never forget just Berlin, just what they were about. It was like my first kind of moment with kind of the respect for cinema. And just how we were all together talking. And I'm like, I need more of this. And ultimately, I couldn't find it in LA. I have pockets of friends, but nothing like where you have 100 people in a room just so excited and talking about, their projects and film. And that's why I started this podcast, actually. It's like, how do I recreate that with what I have? I see like these other festivals as very similar to, these European. Carlo Vivari, I love, that one right there. And, Venice, all these Rotterdam.
Yeah, the United States really would benefit from more of this. There are some small pockets, but there, and for sure there are places, but they're not enough. And it's really, really it's important for film culture, and like you said, when you have those experiences where people are in a room together, really just caring about the movies, that's I find that there could certainly be more of that in the United States.
I feel like New York Film Festival seems very much European in essence.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, Sundance is special. Like Sundance has got its own thing, but it's special. Sundance is great. What else in America that would be kind of high level and cinema driven? Chicago.
Yeah, that has a good that has a good reputation.
Yep, Chicago does. Yeah, we never showed in Tribeca. We've never showed at Tribeca, but I don't know really. Well, there are these burgeoning new festivals. There's one I'll mention here that we recently screened, A Man Imagined, at, that's run by a really great curator named Eric Allen Hatch, and it's called New Next, and it's out of Baltimore.
Oh, sweet.
And he used to run the Maryland Film Festival, and his curation is really adventurous and really interesting. And, and there's some extra excitement because John Waters is a hometown hero there, and he shows up for the festival. It's a really interesting thing that he's created out of Baltimore. And it would be nice to see more pockets of the country having, these new hubs where
just push it forward. Yeah.
But yeah, so there are festivals in the States that are wonderful, but there could always be more film societies and places to build communities.
Well, you really learn about what you're about whenever you get in certain situations. And I've had that full dose. My child's mother is an executive, and she's great. She's sweet, but she's in that world, and it's like I've spent many years just in these parties and talking to people where like, oh, wait, you don't give a shit about the movies, about the movie. You care about other things. So LA is its own thing, and it's, whatever. It's not good or bad. It just is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But it leaves me wanting even more because I'm just I feel like sometimes I'm so far away from, can we talk about the movie, as opposed to like who did it and how much they made or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Our side of things.
Yeah. But so while we're on the topic of festivals really quickly, so I'm just curious also, because I love your festival for this film especially. I love this festival lineup. It's very interesting. So you have, the Vancouver, the Docs A Documentary Film Festival. How is that festival?
That's a great festival. That's a festival in Vancouver. It's like artful documentaries.
Okay.
Alongside more kind of like social issue documentaries, but they have a really good mix.
Got you.
And they're pretty adventurous in their programming. They've also been very supportive of us.
Yes.
And one of the festivals that's shown, I think they've shown 3 of our films.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we've always had great audiences there too. So, some of these festivals are really good at cultivating good audiences. So that you can tell the quality of a certain audience based on how the festival itself just builds community around their screenings. I don't know how they do it on their side.
It's a big deal because not until you have, when you experience going to a festival and nobody's in the audience or whatever, it's just like, it's like, oh. And it's important as a filmmaker to know what you're submitting to sometimes, to understand what festivals are about what, right? I think there's been many times where people could get frustrated for not getting in. It's like, well, you submitted to a festival that doesn't play the type of films that you're making,
Yeah, you have to, once you've been around the block a couple of times, like you become aware of that, but still, it can be hard to get into festivals, especially more and more people are making films more than ever. I heard
so many good films, so many great filmmakers. Yeah. But you don't need all the festivals. You just need the right ones for your film. Right. If you get in where you fit in, that's what I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So last question. If you could go back in time and tell your early filmmaking self some advice, what would it be?
Well, it's advice that I have always followed anyway, but I would just say, just if you have an idea for a film, just go ahead and make it. Don't wait for the money. Don't wait for the best set of conditions. Don't be keep your vision, but don't be too perfectionist about it where, it has to be so perfect that you can't get started. So I would say sometimes I see a lot of people getting hung up on, oh, I didn't get the money. I applied for this grant. I didn't get the money. I thought the producer was going to bring X amount of money. They didn't bring the money. Just get started. Make something great. You really just need a good idea, and you need the vision, and you need the follow through. So I say just go for it.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. I think you need to be your own momentum. And if you can learn a few of the things yourself, like, to whether to operate a camera or to edit, that can be empowering because you're not really waiting for permission. You can get started. And if you can't do it, find a friend or somebody else that can, and, create your own momentum, and surprising things can happen.
Be your own momentum. That's good. That's good. That's a nice simple sentence. It's true too. You need to be able to and I'm talking to myself. You need to be able to pick up a camera if you need to, or you need to be able to edit if you need to. Unless you're fine with the alternative of it not getting done, potentially,
There are a lot of times people will talk for many, many years about the film they're going to make. One day they're going to make the film. Well, just get started. And even if it's a small version of that movie, figure out a way to do it with integrity, and just use a cheap camera if you need to.
And even if you're just doing a little bit, but just do something, just inch towards it, if even that,
I see too many frustrated people lamenting the fact that it didn't come through, this didn't work out, that didn't work out. Well, then work on something else.
Make a shift.
Shift, pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Just make something, get your name out there, get out into the community,
Time is a ticking.
Yeah.
Please like and subscribe to this podcast, and follow us on social media at Past Present Feature. And let us know in the comments section what movies you're watching. Thank you so much for listening to the Past Present Feature podcast, and we'll see you next time. Peace.